A new research says gender imbalance in Korea is challenging marriage prospects for the country's men. So why are Korea's men currently outnumbering its women? What's the gender balance beyond borders? And are there ways to address the broader implications of gender imbalances? Welcome to yet another edition of Issues and Insiders. I'm Min Sunhee. Marriage is looking to be tougher for Korea's men than its women. For more on this, I have Doctor Heo Nayoung at Shanghai University live on the line. Dr. Heo, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Glad to be here.
I also have Kwon Soa with us. Soa, welcome back.
Hello, Sunny.
Right, Dr. Heo, let's begin then with details of your research, including its results.
All right, so before I talk about my research, I want to pay attention to Dr. Dudley Poston's research. So this was done by Dr. Dudley Poston, and it showed the estimates of extra bachelors of 700,000 to 800,000 people, extra bachelors in South Korea, due to the highly imbalanced sex ratios at birth from 1986 to the late 90s. So the sex ratio at birth during this period were estimated to be 110 to 116 on average during those peak period. So the number 116 basically means that there were 116 newborn boys per 100 newborn girls. So you can easily imagine how it will be difficult to find a spouse for guys who were born in that period. So now in my research with Dr. Guy Abel, we compared the sex ratio of people of marriageable age by region. So in Seoul metropolitan area, most regions are gender balanced or even favoring women. However, other areas, especially considered as small cities or rural areas, they are suffering serious gender imbalance. So I guess this tells us two things. So one, guys might have to find someone a lot younger or older, or even look at the international marriage market if they want to get married. And second, women might have more leverage than guys when choosing a spouse.
Right, interesting, very interesting. And Dr. Heo, before we talk more about the potential solutions with regard to these gender imbalances where marriage is concerned, of course, what do you believe are the main reasons behind this gender imbalance?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so high sex ratio at birth has been a long studied topic, not only in Korea, but within the Asian context, as this region tended to have this Confucius tradition that men are thought to be the head of the household or breadwinner of the family. And also there have been prevalent beliefs about advantages of having a boy. So a couple examples of these advantages are, A, they are the ones who inherit the familial assets, and B, they are the conventional heads of the households. And also, due to the government policy focusing on fewer children, starting in the 80s all the way up to, starting in the 60s all the way up to the 80s, the fertility rates have successfully been reduced, while the son preference has remained strong during that time. And the newly introduced ultrasound technique to detect the gender of the baby made it so easy to abort female babies during that time. So all of these seem to create the gender imbalance among the people aged from 29 to 44 of present day, according to my research.
Right, I see. Now, so do tell us a bit more about Korea's past preference for boys. I believe this also was not simply a national trend, though, right, So?
Well, tradition or deep-rooted culture has a lot to do with it. For one, Korea was a very heavily patriarchal society, and that meant men were the heads of the family. That's still being true to some extent today. Sons were or are responsible for performing 제사, or an ancestral rite, for which most of the actual work, though, is done by the women. Now, something that's not that common anymore is that the eldest son, once married, would live with their elderly parents and support them. Another point for favoring the male gender was that traditionally it's been very important for the sons to carry on the family line or bloodline. Thus, men would be prioritized in inheritance of wealth as well. There was also an economic aspect to boy preference when Korea was still an agrarian society where sons were needed for the hard work on family farms. For similar reasons, the preference for boys exists still in many Asian countries that have a patriarchal society based on agriculture, and Confucianism also plays a role. So China, India, and Vietnam are some countries with high preference for boys, evident in high male-to-female ratios in the past decades. But it's not just Asia. Similar observations have also been made in Southeastern Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Africa.
Right, I see. But with regard to South Korea, over the past years, though, I understand there's been a shift in this preference for boys to girls then.
That's true. We often hear that having two daughters is equivalent to having a gold medal, having one daughter and one son, a silver medal, and having two sons. I'd rather not say it aloud because it might hurt the feelings of parents with two or more sons. But the gist is that preference for boys seems to be a thing of the past. The sex ratio change itself is evidence enough. Statistics Korea says as of 2022, the number of males per 100 females stood at 104.7, down 0.4 from a year before. And that was the lowest since the agency started compiling data in 1990. Back then, the ratio was 116.5. The figure continuously dropped before even normalizing in 2007. So the reasons for this shift, let's think about the points I mentioned about male favoring in the past. The patriarchal thinking has changed a lot. Gender equality has improved, and with that, more women are economically active. By law, men and women cannot be discriminated anymore when it comes to inheritance. And speaking of law, the government also came up with laws such as a ban on prenatal sex identification in the late 1980s, like the ultrasound that Dr. Heo mentioned, although it got relaxed again a few years later. Ancestral rights are not followed as strict as in the past, and in modern society, it has become rare for elderly parents to make their son and wife live with them. With that responsibility of sons having diminished, it's actually the daughters that take better care of their parents later in life, being one of the reasons for why daughters are even favored over sons, and especially with people having less children in general. Now, according to a 2022 survey by Hanguk Research, 55% of surveyed preferred having a daughter, while just 31% said the same for having a son. And 70% of people in their 60s and above replied a daughter is a must. And that again implying how elderly, especially in an aging society, rely more on their daughters than their sons.
Right, and staying with this, Dr. Heo, speaking as a scholar of sociology, how do you explain the shift in preference from baby boys to baby girls?
Yeah, so I guess I wouldn't say shift in preference to girls yet, but I guess going back to normal. And I think this really goes back to the abolishment of the family head system, in 2005, and the consequential diffusion of the idea throughout the society that daughters are as valuable as sons, as they provide equal or even more contribution to the family compared to sons. So the diffusion of the idea in rural area can be slower than in urban area, but this might also change as the urbanization rate in Korea is about 80% or more. So currently, the idea of women as equals to men is even more widespread than when the family head system was abolished, as the rate of economic participation of women is highest ever. Women are perfectly capable to provide for their family, own family and their parents, which was supposed to be the man's job in the past. So I assume this diffusion of this idea throughout the country caused this waning son preference.
Right. Now, beyond Korea, Dr. Heo, going back to the results of the study we mentioned at the start, I understand that bleak marriage prospects are also the reality for quite a number of men in other countries. Could you tell us a bit more?
Yeah, indeed. The difficulty men are having in finding a spouse is more serious in China than in Korea, actually. So as China is vast, we really need to consider the regional variation. So in rural China, old bachelors are less likely to find a woman to marry than in urban area due to the scarcity of women and women not willing to marry a guy from rural area or women just migrating out to go to urban area. So Western scholars used to call this rural bachelors as bare branches, which symbolizes tree branches that are standing lonely and left out without matching partners. So there is a male marital squeeze in China where males have trouble finding a wife. And according to Chinese national census in 2020, it recorded a historical high sex ratio at birth of 110. And rural men are experiencing a significant delayed marriage. And the problem that this is bringing is not only that they are not able to marry, but also these bare branch population is getting old too. So as they get older alone in rural area, it is hard for them to reach health or support facilities when they are in need. So the health issues of these bachelors can add to the burden China might face in the near future.
And staying with that, Dr. Heo, what do you propose to perhaps raise the prospects of marriage for men in countries where they outnumber their female counterparts?
Yes, so I think there really is a great challenge ahead for these extra men in these countries. Even they do reach younger or older people to marry, I don't think this is going to alleviate the situation much. So that is why the Korean government has been so proactive in solving the problem by supporting the cross-border marriage market so that the international marriages can be done in a more legal way or more open way. And while this cannot be a sole solution to the problem that we have, I do believe that accepting more immigrants, including marriage immigrants, can be a way of naturally growing the marriage pool of Korea, as our current population is losing its momentum. Another way to alleviate the situation for a rural man is narrowing the gap between rural and urban area. The women of marriageable age are unlikely to stay in a rural area due to rundown facilities, lack of healthcare facilities, and lack of education institutions. So regional imbalance in development is further accelerating the immigration of women. And I think the government needs to cooperate with the local people and communities to think of a way of attracting educated young people back into local areas, for example, encouraging entrepreneurship among them and building cultural amenities in those areas.
Right, of course. And now going back to something that Dr. Heo mentioned, so statistics here in the country do prove that international marriages themselves are actually on the rise in the country, right?
Right. Data released last year showed that Korea experienced the biggest jump in marriages between a Korean and a foreigner in 2022. Now, 17,428 international marriages were recorded in that year. That's an increase by around 25% from the year before. However, I have to mention that the huge leap is actually attributed to a plunge in marriages between Korean nationals and foreign nationals during the COVID-19 pandemic. After continuous increases observed from 2016 to 2019, the lowest figure was posted in 2020, likely due to travel restrictions due to the pandemic, and 2021 was not much different. But as I said, recently we are seeing a rebound again, with 9.1% of total marriages in Korea in 2022 having been international marriages, up from 7.2% the year before. It's still slightly below pre-pandemic levels, but the general trend does seem to point towards an increase in international weddings in Korea. So we'll have to see whether double digits will be achieved maybe in the future, just like back in 2005, when international marriages made up around 13% of total marriages.
Right. Dr. Heo, generally speaking, quite a number of young adults here in Korea are actually shunning marriage itself. That being said, again, what are your proposals to better address this social concern?
Yes, it's a big question, right? So before we label it as a social concern, I think we need to seriously discuss why young adults decided that it's not a good idea to marry. I think it's the change of their values that caused them to decide not to marry, as Soa mentioned earlier. So they might not necessarily give up on marriage yet, but they might just delay the marriage or have different priorities now that the past generations have not thought about. And this is also deeply related to the second demographic transition, as we demographers call, because our needs in life changed from getting married, reproducing, and going through all the normal rites of passage to fulfilling one's bigger purpose in life, which is more prevalent in younger generations. And this is also related to low fertility rates. We can see from social survey of last year, many young people are worried about the cost of wedding and all the other expenses. Not only that, but gender inequality concerns move people away from marriage. So fundamental changes are needed. Formality of weddings can be reduced by a lot. And for those who do want to marry but cannot, we need to, for example, provide a safe environment at work so that both males and females can use parental leaves without fear of losing their job or of getting paid significantly less. And this will encourage both genders to participate in household work and raising children. If they can work without concerns of raising kids, I believe marriage and birth rates together might increase again.
Right, hopefully, of course. And so, do tell us a bit more, actually, about why many of Korea's singles are choosing not to mingle, if I may.
Okay, so only a third of young people in Korea have a positive perception of marriage based on a poll by Statistics Korea, young people referring to those aged 19 to 34. So tying the knot with someone is not perceived as a must anymore. It's not necessary anymore to get married. This is the perception. Now, with a bigger freedom of choice, more and more people are feeling that there are more benefits to living alone. And that is why there's also that expression, that term 혼족, which is a combination of alone plus tribe, and also 비혼, which refers to people who choose to remain unmarried. Although there are also the kangaroo tribes that we talked about before, so those who still will live with their parents, although they are grown up. Now, around a third are single living households, though, in Korea now. And a single life, being unattached, not having children, is nothing to be pitied anymore. But then on the other side, there are young Koreans that actually want to marry but delay it or eventually stay alone because of growing financial pressure, costs of housing and living, and the wedding ceremony itself. From a women's perspective, those who are well educated and want to have a long, fulfilling career, it's often the compromises they have to make after getting married or having children. For instance, because it is difficult to re-enter their workplaces, and that make them shun marriage. And there's also been a survey that I found at Korean Association for Social Welfare Studies, and it says that only 4% of female respondents said that marriage and childbirth are mandatory versus 12.9% of males having said that it's mandatory. There is a big gap, but even I think 13% of males is also quite a low number compared to what we saw in the past.
Right. No longer are women thinking that childbirth is a priority. Even marriage is not a priority anymore. That being said, Professor Heo, some are claiming that the start of a family does not end with just marriage. You have to give birth, as you mentioned, and create an environment where rearing a child should be easy. Schooling has also been pointed out as a very big challenge here in the country. What are your thoughts? How can the government work to ensure that proper schooling is affordable to all children?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is a big question. And I think those are the concerns that the parents really have, the young parents really have. I think they can support the kids who are younger, for example, like from age 3 to 5 or 6. They can provide more schooling, free schooling for those kids. And yeah, I think the support for the education might be a good way for them to think about having children.
Right, of course,
after getting married.
Right, expanding support for children, not just in preschool, but beyond that as well then. Professor Heo,
Right.
thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Right, and so here in the studio, thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you, Sunny.
Right, well, that ends this edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching. We return same time tomorrow.